Chapter 288 Facing Enemies. A murderous autumn wind gusted through the mountain forest. No wonder Kui Dongshan had talked about thieves with golden belts won. Heavy emotions weighed on Chen Ping'an's mind. Being surrounded and hunted like this inevitably reminded him of that surprise attack in the mountain forest in Water-Combing Nation. The assassins from the case purchasing Pagoda and Grandmaster Lin Gushan from Colorful Garment Nation had teamed up in a malicious manner to attack Chen Ping'an. If it weren't for Su Lang, the green bamboo sword immortal, changing sides and helping Chen Ping'an, it was extremely difficult to say who would have ended up dead. Chen Ping'an had already been sufficiently careful during this trip to the north. He frequently climbed to high vantage points to gaze into the distance, and he would remain vigilant against people tailing them even when he was wandering through the streets and markets with Lu Tai. Thus, the fact that he hadn't noticed these people surrounding him and Lu Tai was already a clear sign of the severity of the problem. Their opponents were predators hiding in the shadows, so they definitely wouldn't have revealed their presence if they weren't confident of achieving victory. An intense battle was about to begin, and Lu Tai appeared to be slightly lacking in confidence as he asked, "Chen Ping'an, you're not truly just a fourth-tier martial artist, are you?" Chen Ping'an was slightly taken aback. He had no idea why Lu Tai was suddenly asking such a question. However, he nodded anyway and replied, "Of course I am." Lu Tai huffed and revealed honestly, "And here I was, thinking that you were at the 5th tier and purposely hiding your true cultivation base from me. In fact, that would have been more normal. When traveling through the cultivation world, who doesn't use some illusion techniques? For example, I exaggerated my cultivation base a little bit. I'm not at the Dragon Gate tier, and I'm actually at the 7th tier, the Sea Observation tier." Chen Ping'an shot a glare at Lu Tai and exclaimed, "You're still pulling tricks like this at such a dangerous time? Are you seeking death?" Lu Tai was in the wrong, so he didn't retort Chen Ping'an. Instead, he simply grumbled endlessly in his mind. With a tap of his foot, Lu Tai caused the branch under him to sway as he leaped toward the crown of the tree. He appeared calm and collected, yet this wasn't the case in reality. He had already closed his folding fan and was gently smacking it against his palm. However, Lu Tai was a chi refiner at the Sea Observation tier, after all, and he was also someone with deep knowledge in many fields. He had a large collection of books, and he was also fond of learning all kinds of different skills. Thus, it could be said that he was a jack of all trades but a master of none. Even so, Lu Tai's breadth of skills was only unrefined in the context that he was a supreme cultivation prodigy in his clan. Compared to those vagrant cultivators and itinerant cultivators who had relied on luck and incomplete secret techniques to advance to the middle 5 tiers, Lu Tai was far superior in both judgment and skills. However, it was difficult to say whether these advantages could be translated into victory in battles of life and death. Even if they weren't actual criminals, those itinerant cultivators who were brainless and brash would choose to fight with their lives on the line once they faced a perilous situation or faced some irresistible benefit. During such moments, they would display their stark contrast to those immortal disciples who were pampered and had received inheritances in a systematic manner. These itinerant cultivators would become vicious, sly, and willing to suffer grave injuries to kill their opponents. "Do you need me to buy time for you?" Chen Ping'an asked quietly. "Do you need to roughly gauge their strength and backgrounds first? I don't have enough experience when it comes to fighting against cultivators, and there's also a lack of understanding and synergy between us. It's very easy for me to hold you back." "Sure thing," Lu Tai replied with his mind's voice. His reply was short and sharp. However, perhaps afraid that Chen Ping'an would misunderstand him for wanting to be an idle spectator, he added, "I'll immediately notify you about their techniques and the background of said techniques once I discover anything. I'll also tell you how to defend against them and defeat them." Chen Ping'an nodded and retrieved an inch movement talisman from his sleeve. This was a backup measure to guard against any unforeseen circumstances. "We can't be careless in battles of life and death," Chen Ping'an said. "I understand," Lu Tai replied with a chuckle. Chen Ping'an took a deep breath. Chen Ping'an, was yet to start practicing fist techniques back in the small town. However, relying on the rules and geographical advantage in Jewel's small world, I almost managed to kill both Sai Jinjian and Fu Nanhua in that small alley. That being the case, why can't other people kill me and Lu Tai? Chen Ping'an was still standing on the tall branch. Even though this carried the risk of making him an easy target, it was very important to have a wide view and understand the enemy before facing off against them. Taking some risks to understand, the situation was much better than rushing in like a headless chook. These bandits had started to secretly plot and tail them from Planchette Writing Sec's Sky-Calling Street, but they weren't gathered together in a large group. Instead, they were scattered around in small groups of 2 or 3. However, the number of visible bandits already numbered 10 or so. They were like a pack of wolves, closing in on their prey. "Who are you people?" Chen Ping'an asked in a solemn voice. Not a single person replied. Immortals from the mountains, traveling hundreds of kilometers to hunt prey and gather loot, weren't the same as scoundrels who wandered around the streets and alleys. They weren't like those scoundrels who argued for half a day, yet were averse to fighting and shedding blood. Loudly announcing one's name and identity would often appear quite impressive. However, this would very easily expose one's abilities and trump cards. This was especially the case with those who liked to purposely and proudly shout the names of their techniques before they attacked. Was this not asking for trouble? If one were unfortunate, such actions would amount to nothing short of seeking death. Take, for example, the name of the flying sword owned by the Golden Core Tier Sword Cultivator on Osmanthus Island. The bonded flying sword was called Lingering Shade, and this immediately revealed its close relationship to water and the yin element. Thus, unleashing techniques and using immortal treasures that were filled with yang energy would often yield better results against the flying sword. With this in mind, would the Golden Core Tier Sword Cultivator from Osmanthus Island actively reveal the name of his bonded flying sword to his enemy if he were engaged in an intense battle with them? Even though Chen Ping'an had never seen Lu Tai's 2 flying swords before, the names Needle Tip and Weedon were already enough information for him to form some speculations. It was very likely that these flying swords specialized in focused and intense attacks rather than sweeping area of effect attacks. Lu Tai used his mind's voice to silently inform Chen Ping'an of the current situation. Looking at the enemies directly in front of Chen Ping'an, they needed to be extremely cautious of the burly man with iron whips in his hands, as well as the person standing beside him. This other person was clearly a sword expert who had taken a different path. He wasn't a chi refiner, yet he wasn't exactly a pure martial artist either. Even though such kinds of people didn't possess bonded flying swords, making them crude cultivators who liked to brandish swords in the cultivation world, they could use their chi to manipulate their swords in a manner that made the swords seem like bonded flying swords to other people. However, this was naturally different from genuine sword kinesis performed by sword cultivators. As for the burly man with the iron whip, he was a cultivator who had tempered his physique according to some heretical methods of the Militarian sect. However, it was difficult to say whether he was a chi refiner or a pure martial artist, although the latter was more likely. The burly man was muscular with bulging veins, measuring almost 9 feet tall and radiating with a domineering aura. There were 2 iron whips in his hands, and he chuckled coldly as he looked at Chen Ping'an through the sparse branches, saying, "Good one, little brat. You're truly a very tricky one. You purposely walked with uneven footsteps when you went to the Cease Walking Pavilion in Planchette Writing Sect, and that almost caused me to misjudge your strength. I thought you were only a 3rd-tier martial artist. After walking hundreds of kilometers from the Hanging Garment Mountain, however, I finally discovered that your footsteps were actually so light and even, disregarding your cultivation base and simply focusing on your alertness and caution." The burly man raised the iron whip in his left hand before continuing with a vicious smile. "You're worthy of having your head smashed in by a single strike from my iron whip." The burly man was speaking in the official dialect of Parasol Leaf Continent. At this moment, Lu Tai was no longer a feminine man who liked to put on makeup. He was no longer a graceful young master from a noble clan. Rather, he spoke quickly and concisely as he informed Chen Ping'an about the identities and backgrounds of their enemies. The person to the southeast is a Taoist priest who uses talismans. I suspect that the group of bandits most likely didn't manage to recruit a genuine Militarian cultivator, so they had settled for the next best thing in this Taoist priest. He's going to use talismanic armor as foot soldiers. If the bandits managed to get their hands on one or two puppets made by Mohist cultivators as well, then the effectiveness of our flying swords would have been greatly reduced. After all, talismanic armor and puppets are both inanimate objects. Talismans are hard to break, while the cores of puppets are difficult to find. However, I'm unsure of whether this Taoist priest possesses any talismans that specifically target sword cultivators and their flying swords. In any case, the possibility isn't big. Generally speaking, only cultivators at the Golden Core tier and Nascent tier can afford to use those few types of precious talismans that especially target sword cultivators. But if we're genuinely that unlucky, then it will be quite hard to say. For example, the Taoist priest might possess those two types of high-grade talismans called Sword Scabbard and Mountain Sealing. These talismans especially target elusive flying swords, and the flying swords will essentially be flying into traps. They'll be temporarily sealed for a period of time. The combat power of sword cultivators will plunge to a very low level if they lose their flying swords, even if it's only for a short moment. Because of this, we need to remain extremely cautious of this Taoist priest, seeing as our greatest advantage is our 4 flying swords. Even if we don't summon our flying swords to attack the enemies, we still need to keep a close eye on the subtle movements of the Taoist priest's sleeves. The person to the southwest is a Qi refiner who practices wood element cultivation techniques. It was most likely he who concealed their presence this entire time. He's most likely raising some flower demons and wood ghosts. When you engage with them in a moment, remember to be wary of the plants, trees, vines, and so on. It's exactly because they're unremarkable that they're even more tricky and difficult to deal with than sword cultivators and their flying swords. Chen Ping'an silently committed all of this information to memory. While doing so, he kept his eyes fixed on the burly man as well as the sword expert beside him. He also watched the Taoist priest from the talismanic branch out of the corner of his eye. He chuckled coldly and said, "Since my friend and I dared to spend so much money in front of other people in Planchette Writing Sec's Sky Calling Street, we naturally weren't afraid of causing others to become jealous and depraved." The burly man was thoroughly amused, and he chuckled, "Little brat, don't try to trick me with your weasel words. The two of you are outsiders who can't even speak the official dialect of Parasol Leaf Continent fluently, so what does it matter even if you come from sect-level forces? What does it matter even if your masters are Earth immortals? Is that very impressive?" The sword expert standing beside the burly man was a slender man wearing a black robe. His face was extremely pale, and his eyes were also slightly sunken. He appeared a little sinister as he smiled and remarked, "Of course that's impressive. However, it's a shame that they're too far away to help." The burly man suddenly burst into loud laughter. A smile also spread across the sword expert's face. The two men who were closely acquainted with each other looked toward Lu Tai, who was standing even higher up. "While following the two of you, I've been forced to endure your intimate and romantic interactions this entire time," the middle-aged sword expert said. "You have to take responsibility for the flames of sin and lust in my body. If you're tactful enough, you might even be able to walk away from this alive." Lu Tai paid no heed to this person's provocation. He remained calm and unfazed as he continued to explain the situation to Chen Ping'an. "There's a naturalist formation cultivator setting up formations directly behind us. Not far from him, there's also a young boy and a young girl who are most likely his prized disciples. In reality, this formation cultivator is the most troublesome person. Chen Ping'an, I'll kill this person first if I get the opportunity. The only reason why they're staying put right now is because they're waiting for the formation cultivator to finish his half-assed mountain-moving formation. Don't worry, I'll find an opportunity to deal with them. I definitely won't let him and his disciples succeed. However, before I do anything, you definitely need to draw their attention first. Even distracting them ever so slightly will be enough." Chen Ping'an nodded imperceptibly. Lu Tai continued to analyze their opponents. "There's also a demonic cultivator near the formation cultivator's two disciples. He's neither like a human nor like a ghost, and his entire body is radiating with a strong yin energy. This type of chi refiner spends much of their time wandering around unmarked burial grounds and tombs. They can trap lone souls and wandering ghosts inside their spirit tools and transform them into subordinates that they can control. In fact, they'll raise malicious ghosts using a similar method to raising poisonous insects. There are another two people standing to the left and right even further behind us. However, their task is to watch over the situation and prevent the two of us from escaping. Judging from this setup, the main force of our enemies is to the south. That is, in front of us. Seeing Lu Tai remain unfazed, flames of frustration further joined the flames of sin and lust in the middle-aged sword expert's body. There was a disturbing smile on his face as he asked, "Have the two of you become one yet?" Chen Ping'an was completely clueless about what the sword expert was trying to say. He simply pretended that the sword expert was using some jargon common among cultivators from the mountains. Or perhaps he was saying some strange things that didn't deserve any attention. However, he detected a rare hint of fury from Lu Tai at this moment. In fact, Lu Tai stopped communicating with Chen Ping'an using his mind's voice. He surprisingly changed his mind and glowered at the middle-aged sword expert, saying with a dark expression, "Chen Ping'an, I was the one who caused this trouble to begin with, so you can focus on traveling north by yourself first. I'll deal with them alone." "Can you kill all of them and then leave safely by yourself?" Chen Ping'an asked. Lu Tai didn't reply. "Are you that fond of dying in some desolate place without a burial ground? Will you be happy that no one can find your corpse?" Chen Ping'an snapped. Lu Tai spat before chuckling, "Don't curse me." Chen Ping'an fell silent and remained unmoving in the same spot for a while. Only then did he finally say, "Then speak less nonsense and kill more people." Lu Tai suddenly spoke to Chen Ping'an using his mind's voice again, exclaiming, "Now." Chen Ping'an didn't hesitate at all. He pinched the inch movement talisman in his sleeve, one that had been drawn according to the authentic death-avoiding book. He then vanished in a flash. The middle-aged sword expert wearing a black robe with large sleeves immediately tensed up, knowing that things were moving in a very unfavorable direction. Fortunately, the burly man had already strode forward and shielded the middle-aged sword expert behind him. Not only that, but he rapidly swung his iron whip at the space in front of him as well, remarking, "Quite interesting." After suddenly materializing in front of the burly man and the middle-aged sword expert, Chen Ping'an surprisingly didn't try to avoid the burly man's aggressive strike. Instead, he charged forward even more resolutely, intent on engaging in close-quarter combat with his opponents. However, he tilted his head slightly and bent his back, using lasting chi, the sword on his back, to forcefully withstand the strike from the iron whip. At the same time, he used the deity drumming technique to smash the burly man's chest. One punch landing meant 10 punches, or even 100 punches landing. If Chen Ping'an had enough energy, and if he were able to throw punch after punch, then what would it matter even if his opponent were a legendary Zenith Heaven Golden Immortal? Their golden body would still be utterly annihilated. The middle-aged sword expert only faltered for a short moment, and it wasn't long before a burst of azure flew out from his large sleeve. Meanwhile, the burly man spat out a mouthful of blood as he stumbled backward 5 to 6 steps. He brandished one whip in front of him, creating a watertight defense. At the same time, he roared at the top of his lungs, "Protect the formation cultivator." At almost exactly the same instant, Chen Ping'an issued a silent command with his mind, saying, "15th." An emerald green and slender sword ray instantly burst forth from his sword, nurturing Gord. The Taoist priest from the talismanic branch chuckled coldly and sneered, "How surprising, you're genuinely a sword cultivator." The burly man suddenly felt a searing pain travel over from his left shoulder. His heart shuddered violently. How was it possible for this flying sword to be so quick? After landing the first punch, and before throwing the third punch of the deity drumming technique. Not long after 15th left the sword nurturing Gord, there was a clang as it shattered the sword ray from the middle-aged sword expert's sleeve. However, it was immediately enveloped by a glowing red talisman, unable to escape no matter how it flew around and attacked the talisman. The middle-aged sword expert had a vicious expression as he waved his large sleeve again, unleashing another flying sword. Chen Ping'an continued to ignore the skillful sword manipulation of the middle-aged sword expert, almost like a wraith as he arrived behind the burly man and forcefully slammed the third punch into his back. The fist aura from his ferocious punch directly brushed past the burly man's heart. Chen Ping'an lowered his target to the right, directly striking the burly man's spine with his fourth punch. Meanwhile, the Taoist priest used another extremely precious talisman to trap first, the additional flying sword that had once again shattered the sword expert's sword ray. The old Taoist priest's expression was livid. His eyelids twitched, and his heart ached immensely. It was as if blood were dripping from his heart. This young bastard actually owned 2 flying swords. Perhaps the small red wine gourd by the young boy's waist was actually a sword-nurturing gourd. Upon thinking of this, a fervent expression immediately appeared in the old Taoist priest's eyes. Very well, absolutely incredible. It was worth it for me to use 2 precious trump cards at once. I'll still make a killing as long as we succeed. The layer of protective qi around the burly man's body had already been obliterated by Chen Ping'an's third punch. As a result, Chen Ping'an's fourth punch genuinely smashed into the burly man's spine. There was a series of soft cracking sounds. Other people might not pay much attention to this, but the burly man was so terrified that his soul almost left his body. His back would truly be shattered if he were struck by another punch. The burly man no longer dared to hold back, heavily stomping his foot and wrapping his left hand around his right wrist. He held the index finger and middle finger of his right hand together, and he arched his back as if he were a prancing tiger ready to strike. His eyes instantly became snow white, and his blood, tendons, and bones immediately became filled with power. It was as if he were a deity descending down to the world. Afterward, he transformed into a kite with a broken string as he was sent flying forward by Chen Ping'an's fifth punch. He crashed into the ground with a heavy thud. However, Chen Ping'an didn't feel too good either. His back was struck by the burly man's iron whip, and almost half of the force slammed into his body, even though the whip had actually struck lasting qi. Both 1st and 15th were trapped by the old Taoist priest's precious talismans, unable to break free for the moment. In order to successfully throw the 5th punch of the deity drumming technique, Chen Ping'an had also been struck by a sword ray launched by the middle-aged sword expert. The sword ray had pierced through his shoulder, leaving a bloody wound. However, Chen Ping'an's aura didn't falter, and it instead grew even more powerful. His soul was condensed, and his fist intent was raging, so much so that it was almost visible to the naked eye. It was clear that he wasn't putting up one final struggle. Rather, his aura was still rising explosively. It was as if he were the sun rising above the East Sea, destined to reach the apex in the sky. The young boy couldn't help but crack a grin. This kind of small wound was nothing to him. One, murderer and thief with a golden belt, refers to wealthy people who choose to commit crimes.